Donald Trump has returned to Beijing after nearly 9 years. And on the surface, it looked almost warm. A red carpet, a military honor guard, children waving flags, a grand welcome outside the Great Hall of the People. Then came the handshake. Donald Trump and Xi Jinping standing together in the middle of one of the most consequential diplomatic meetings in the world. But this was not simply a ceremonial visit, because when the presidents of the United States and China sit across from each other, they are not just discussing trade. They are discussing the future of global power. Oil prices, AI chips, Taiwan, the Iran war, supply chains, American farmers, Chinese factories, and whether the world's two most powerful countries can compete without eventually crashing into each other. That is why this summit matters. Not because Trump and Xi suddenly became friends, but because both countries now understand something very clearly. A full-blown U.S. China confrontation would not stay between Washington and Beijing. It would shake the entire global economy. And that is exactly what made the atmosphere in Beijing so fascinating. China did not offer a cold, stiff, purely formal reception. It staged a welcome meant to feel historic, almost civilizational and non-aggressive. The visuals were deliberate: discipline, grandeur, stability, confidence. And Trump noticed it immediately. He praised the ceremony, and especially the children who welcomed him. But in diplomacy, these moments are never just casual observations. The ceremony was part of the message. China wanted to show that it was not approaching this summit as a nervous or cornered power, but as a state that sees itself as America's equal on the world stage. And Trump, at least publicly, played into that tone. He described the meeting as the biggest summit the world was watching. He praised Xi personally. He said the U.S. and China had worked through difficult moments before, and he emphasized that he had brought the best representatives of American businesses with him. That last part is crucial, because this visit was not only about geopolitics, it was also about economics. Trump came to Beijing looking for visible wins: more Chinese purchases of American goods, more exports, more business agreements, and less risk of another destructive trade spiral. Before and during the summit, U.S. officials pointed to potential progress on Boeing aircraft, agriculture, energy purchases, and new trade and investment forums. Trump later said China had agreed to buy 200 Boeing jets, though the detailed terms were not immediately disclosed. And China had its own reasons to avoid escalation. Its economy is not collapsing, but it is under pressure. Domestic demand has shown weakness, household lending contracted sharply in April, and youth unemployment remained elevated earlier this spring. At the same time, the Iran war has added fresh uncertainty to global energy markets. A serious problem for a country whose industrial strength depends heavily on stable access to imported fuel. This is where the energy story becomes important. For years, China has benefited from discounted crude supplies from countries like Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. That mattered because cheaper energy supports factories, transport, exports, and heavy industry, the entire machinery of a manufacturing superpower. But in recent months, Washington's moves have squeezed parts of that network. After the U.S. intervention in Venezuela, oil flows that had heavily favored China began shifting, with deals redirecting Venezuelan crude toward the United States. Reuters reported that China had been the dominant buyer of Venezuelan oil in 2025, and that those exports were expected to fall under the new U.S.-backed oil arrangements. Then came Iran. Chinese independent refiners had become major buyers of Iranian oil, importing record volumes in March. But the war in the Middle East and Iran's restrictions around the Strait of Hormuz turned that energy route into a strategic vulnerability. The EIA now assumes the strait will remain effectively closed through late May, and China has been pushing diplomatically for transit access for its vessels. So when Trump arrived in Beijing, energy was not just an economic issue, it was a geopolitical pressure point. And according to U.S. officials, Xi expressed interest in buying more American oil as a way to reduce China's dependence on the Strait of Hormuz. But Chinese officials did not publicly confirm that discussion, which is important. But even the fact that Washington raised it tells us how energy security was sitting quietly in the background of this summit. And that is why the warmth of the summit should not be mistaken for trust. Behind the smiles, both sides were calculating. China wants to stabilize access to markets, technology, and energy. The United States wants trade wins, economic relief, and leverage in a world already destabilized by war in the Middle East. But neither side is abandoning the rivalry, and nowhere is that clearer than in technology. While Trump and Xi were shaking hands in Beijing, another struggle was unfolding behind the scenes over Nvidia's H200 AI chips. Because U.S. approved around 10 Chinese firms, including Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance, to buy these advanced AI chips. And that is significant because AI is no longer just a software race. It is becoming the foundation of future military systems, industrial automation, cyber capabilities, and national economic power. But the story did not end with approval. Chinese customs agents had earlier been instructed that H200 chips were not permitted to enter the country. Chinese officials also reportedly warned domestic technology firms against buying them unless absolutely necessary. That means Beijing was not simply begging for American chips. It was weighing a deeper strategic concern. If China becomes too dependent on U.S. technology, then Washington gains a pressure point inside China's future economy. This is what makes the AI issue so revealing. America wants to remain ahead in the most powerful technologies. China wants access, but not dependence. American companies want revenue. Chinese companies want compute power. And both governments see the same chips through the lens of national security. That is not normal trade. That is geoeconomics. And it is one reason Trump brought top business figures into this diplomatic moment. The summit included major American corporate names tied to AI, electric vehicles, aviation, and technology. Xi, for his part, told U.S. business leaders that China would open wider, signaling that Beijing still wants American capital and corporate engagement, even as strategic mistrust grows. But if technology is the long-term battlefield, Taiwan remains the immediate flashpoint. During the summit, Xi delivered one of his starkest warnings. He called Taiwan the most important issue in U.S. China relations, and said that if it is mishandled, the two countries could face clashes and even conflicts. That statement matters because Taiwan is not a side issue for Beijing. It is tied to sovereignty, nationalism, and the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. But for Washington, Taiwan represents something very different. A strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific, a check on Chinese military expansion, and a central node in the world's semiconductor ecosystem. So even if the summit produced warmer language on trade and cooperation, Taiwan remains the one issue that can transform managed rivalry into direct crisis. And then there is Iran. Publicly, both sides tried to keep the tone constructive. But the Iran war was impossible to ignore. The conflict has affected oil markets, shipping routes, and Trump's domestic political position. According to reporting from the summit, Trump said Xi had assured him that China would not provide military equipment to Iran. Whether that becomes a durable restraint or simply a diplomatic line remains to be seen. But the fact that Iran came up so directly shows how the Middle East is now influencing U.S. China relations in real time. China does not want a regional war that threatens its energy lifelines. The United States does not want Beijing strengthening Tehran at a moment when Washington is already deeply involved in the conflict. So Iran became more than a Middle East issue. It became part of the U.S.-China power equation. That brings us to Xi's most important phrase of the day, the Thucydides trap. It sounds academic, but the idea is simple. When a rising power challenges an established superpower, history often becomes dangerous. China is the rising power. The United States is the established one. Xi asked whether both countries could avoid that trap and build a new model of relations, one based on what Beijing called constructive strategic stability. In plain English, China was saying, "We will compete. We will not accept U.S. dominance forever." But can this rivalry be managed without spiraling into open conflict? That is the true question hanging over this summit. Because this meeting was not about friendship, it was about containment. Not only containing each other, but containing the risks created by their own rivalry. The United States wants to slow China's rise where it threatens American strategic advantages. China wants to reduce dependence on systems Washington can weaponize. Both want economic benefits from cooperation. Both are preparing for a harder future. So what did this summit really achieve? It did not erase the trade war. It did not solve Taiwan. It did not end the AI competition. It did not remove tensions over Iran. But it may have created something both sides urgently needed: a temporary architecture for controlled competition, a way to keep talking, a way to make deals where interests overlap, a way to prevent every disagreement from becoming a crisis. That matters, especially now. Because in 2026, the U.S. China relationship is no longer just one bilateral relationship among many. It has become the central operating system of global politics. If it stabilizes, markets breathe easier. If it fractures, the whole world feels the tremor. That is why the image from Beijing is so powerful. Two leaders smiling for the cameras. Two delegations talking business. Two governments using words like cooperation, stability, and partnership. But underneath all of that, there is still a much harsher reality. America and China are not becoming allies. They are trying to become rivals who do not accidentally destroy the system both still need. And whether they can maintain that balance may decide far more than the next trade deal. It may decide the direction of the next decade.